Making the headlines with the political journalist Isabel Oakeshott and the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha. Welcome to both of you. Good to see you. So, as ever, to the front pages, starting with the Metro. It leads with the British Airways data hack that has affected 380,000 of its customers. That story also appears on the front of the Daily Mail. Bank cards hacked from BA. The UK's allies are queuing up to accuse Putin over the Salisbury poisoning. That is according to The Guardian. The dose of nerve agent brought into the UK by the two Russian nationals had the potential to kill 4,000 people. That story makes the front of the Times. The Daily Telegraph has a piece about Britain's cyber intelligence agency, GCHQ. Its director, Jeremy Fleming, will deploy the full range of tools to counter the threat posed by Vladimir Putin's regime. The sad passing of film legend Burt Reynolds, who died at the age of 82, makes the front of the Daily Mirror. Hollywood is in mourning over the megastar's death. That's according to The Star. The headline in the Eye, no deal Brexit means deeper cuts to Britain's public sector. The Financial Times reports that more than 11 million British households will save an average of £75 a year on their gas and electricity bills under a newly proposed price cap. To the Daily Express now, new figures show that police are failing to catch the vast majority of burglars, car thieves and shoplifters. The Sun reports on former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson's home life. We've approached Boris Johnson's office for a response, but they have declined to comment so far. So let's talk more then. Isabel Oakeshott, Sonia Sodha are here. Starting with Novichok, obviously the UN Security Council has discussed this, and once again support from allies for Britain's response to this.
Yes, so there's been a very robust collective response to the new evidence that has been released by the police and security services as to who exactly was responsible for the poisoning of the Skripals and the subsequent death of a British national. And this is very encouraging, I think, for the UK as allies have rallied towards us. There is a real feeling that, a message needs to be sent to Russia that it cannot flout the international rules-based order with impunity. What's very difficult for not only for the UK, but also for our allies is to work out precisely how you respond to this in a way that actually really troubles President Putin. He is not a leader who recognises norms. The way he conducts his aggression is to calculate it to be just below the threshold of what would trigger a kind of NATO Article 5 style military response. So it's what's appropriate. There's naturally a lot of talk about targeting the oligarchs that are bringing a lot of their dirty money to London and, sanctions and so on. But it's quite difficult to know where to gauge this.
Yes, and I mean, I agree that is the big question, what's next? And several people have pointed to the fact that there is a huge amount of Russian wealth in London and big questions about where it comes from. So, for example, a very significant former Russian politician, Igor Shuvalov, he was declaring an income of £112,000 a year, and yet he owns, he's bought two luxury flats in Whitehall for £11.4 million. Where is that money coming from? You've got other very prominent Russians as well. So in terms of really hitting Putin where it hurts, surely it makes sense to go after some of his allies who have massive stashes of wealth in London, because, as Isabel said, this is a PR coup for him. What he's doing, he's continuing to maintain this is just a conspiracy theory. Of course, Russia had nothing to do with this. Victoria Skripal, the niece of the victim of this sort of attack, has been wheeled out again in Russia, saying, the UK is sort of casting aspersions on Russia, and Putin will be looking to shore up his popularity at home. So
the benefit for the UK government of pinning down the suspicion that it is these two men that carried it out, that they were in and out in 2 days, they were in Salisbury twice, reconnaissance one day, and then again to perhaps carry out the attack, 2 hours only. to come and walk down to the
It's extraordinary, and I think the CCTV footage that's come out and the sequence of events is just so compelling. I mean, it's very difficult to argue against that, but, you know, Russia doesn't care how brazen its lies are. You know, it doesn't recognise any need to tell the truth. So it will quite happily just say, this is all a confection, it's concocted, this is fake news.
Yes, and raising the point at the UN today,
and
the Russian
they're very
ambassador...
effective at that.
Yes, and if, you know, you can't say they're GRU, military intelligence, if you don't know their real names.
Well, they're very, very effective at that. And thus far, we haven't heard, I'm happy to say, people in this country of any stature, you know, continuing to cast doubt. The fresh evidence that has come out has pretty much shut up the doubters, I think.
Because who else would want to kill a former GRU colonel? It's a Russian
But
man.
let's not forget that at the time of the attacks, we had many Labour figures casting doubt on the intelligence from our security services, suggesting that, in fact, they might have got it wrong, as they did over weapons of mass destruction. The Mail takes an interesting angle on Russia's military build-up, which I'm very interested in.
So up the top here, yeah.
I've been helping Lord Ashcroft write a book on the state of our armed forces, and we've been looking at the state of Russia's armed forces, and it is absolutely true that President Putin has been piling vast resources into pumping up his military. But I think we need to keep this in proportion. Russia's ground forces have been definitely modernised, but they have got many, many weaknesses and lots of conscripts there, people who are corralled into being in the armed forces. They're poorly paid, very demoralised. A lot of them are poorly trained. And let's not forget that Russia is actually, you know, pretty much an economic basket case. It's prioritised defence, but it has many weaknesses, and its war games planned coming up. There are several hundred thousand military personnel involved in that. They are very much a showpiece. Yes, it's alarming. This is sort of heavy metal diplomacy, but it doesn't mean that they are capable of going up against NATO.
Yes, indeed. And the other armament is sanctions, of course. Some nations like Italy pulling back because some of the sanctions already brought in April, for example, on aluminium, impacted mining stocks, impacted banks that deal with aluminium, even impacted drinks can manufacturers. Yeah. So it also impacts the nations who bring the sanctions in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a problem with sanctions, isn't it? You're hurting yourself and your own economies, but also once you've introduced the sanctions, there's quite sort of limited manoeuvre to go further. I mean, what do? You just have to introduce kind of even more sanctions, I suppose. So it is a tricky one because what do you do that doesn't land Putin with a PR victory is actually very difficult, the way that I think this has been set up by Russia. And I do think, you know, Russia is very smart the way it interacts with social media. I mean, you know, we're talking a lot about the military, but, you know, the info wars are where a lot of it's at. And, you know, it's tweeting stuff out from the Russian Embassy UK Twitter account saying, here's a picture of the two suspects, here's a picture of, you know, British sort of experts going in to look at the crime scene. They're all in this special gear. They're in, you know, the suspects are in a baseball cap. Men working with the most deadly military-grade toxin of high purity. How many differences can you spot, says the Russian embassy? They're being...
So these are the inside pages of the Daily Mail, if we take a look at that. But that's the point that was made today. This is such a dangerous a poison, effectively, chemical weapon, that actually to deploy it, you would not be dressed like the men on the left.
Well, we were talking about this earlier, and I'm still confused. I haven't seen, perhaps somebody has answered this question, but how were those suspects able to deploy this substance without themselves being affected?
Because the little bottle of Nina Ricci perfume had a nozzle attached to it, so you could spray it without touching the actual nozzle.
But it seems to be so toxic that even people who've come into quite distant contact with it may be at risk. So there are clearly many unanswered questions.
Well, in fact, the front page of the Times is talking about the toxicity.
Yes.
And make no mistake, this is a brazen attack. Reckless Russian agents could have killed 4,000.
It's really lucky that only one person... I mean, it's not lucky, of course, because it's absolutely tragic.
But anybody could have found that. You mean, it was a charity bin, Charlie Rowan.
Yeah, absolutely. And what if more people had sprayed it on themselves? And I think this is really the point. Russia literally seems to have had no care for who might have been, which British citizens and how many British citizens might have been caught up in the fallout. And it's an incredibly brazen attack.
But where does that leave NATO in terms of a collective response? Because it's not a conventional military attack as Article 5 was designed for.
And are the waters muddied because of the complexities of Russia and President Trump, which takes us to the Guardian, talking about the White House in turmoil. We learn more, don't we, from Bob Woodward's book, which is just out.
Absolutely.
The man who helped bring down Nixon, or the journalist who helped bring down Nixon with all the president's men. And now this follow-up from an insider in the White House, the resistance that the New York Times has published.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've learned from the Woodward book and from this anonymous op-ed from a senior White House official is that...
What does that stand for all of us who...
Do you know what? I was just thinking that. Opinion editorial, is that right?
Yes,
Op-ed.
opinion editorial.
Which is the sort of thing that you do.
It is the thing, but it's
She's
actually
got the jargon.
it's a very American term, you're right,
Okay.
op-ed. It basically means opinion column.
Yeah.
But essentially some of the things that have come out is that Trump apparently was very reluctant to expel Russian diplomats from America. So really had to be sort of convinced and overruled to do it. But I think a lot of the revelations that have come out, there are questions being asked about this opinion column that has been penned by this anonymous White House official. What is it actually achieving? Because it's made Trump extremely
Paranoid.
infuriated, paranoid. It now looks like he's about to launch a witch hunt within the White House to find out who wrote it. And actually, if there's a sort of secret subterfuge network of undercover
Subterfuge.
Yes. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for helping me out there. But if there is a group of people working to sort of prevent the worst excesses of President Trump from the inside, why are they doing something that has launched this witch hunt against them? It doesn't seem like the
They
most
should probably have
productive way
waited
forward.
to tell their story until the game's over, really, shouldn't they?
Well, treason, question mark, is what Mr. Trump said, isn't it? He's off to another Make America Great Again rally. So we will see if he has anything to say about this. He was certainly furious yesterday, wasn't he?
He was.
Coming up, we will be talking about unwashed millennials. Perhaps there's one living in your house. Perhaps they don't exist. It seems very unfair. Anyway, back in a moment.